Son called me on a Friday afternoon and I almost let it go to voicemail. I was out back replacing a rotted fence post, hands dirty, back already complaining, and when my phone buzzed in my shirt pocket, I saw his name and thought, he's fine. Marcus calls on Sundays. I'll call him back tonight. I almost didn't answer. I'm glad I did. Dad. His voice was level. Too level. The way it gets when he's working hard to sound like nothing is wrong and almost pulling it off. He's been doing that since he was 11 years old. I know that voice the way I know the sound of my own truck in the driveway. Just checking in. How are you holding up? I told him I was fine, asked about the kids. He told me a story about my grandson Cooper that made me laugh, then a shorter story about my granddaughter Paige losing a tooth. Then he asked about my knee, and then he said he had to get dinner started and he'd talk to me Sunday. Perfectly normal. Except Marcus does not call on Fridays to check in. He calls on Sundays. He has called on Sundays for 3 years, ever since his mother passed. He never explained why he switched to Sundays. He just did. I figured it out on my own. I told myself I was reading too much into things. I finished the fence post. I went inside and made a sandwich I didn't really taste. I should have trusted what I heard in his voice. I spent 28 years working risk assessment and loss prevention for a regional insurance carrier in central Ohio. Not a glamorous job. Most people's eyes glaze over when I describe it. But what it trained me to do more than anything was to notice when something small was wrong before the large thing became obvious. Discrepancies. Timing. The detail that doesn't fit. I got good at it. I retired at 61 thinking that skill would just sit quietly inside me like an old tool I no longer needed. I was wrong about that. My son married a woman named April 12 years ago. She is organized, warm, and smarter than most people realize on first meeting. They have 2 kids, Cooper, who is 9, and Paige, who is 6. They live about 35 minutes from me in the same town where Marcus grew up, outside Columbus. After his mother passed, Marcus started calling on Sundays. I have a house I own free and clear, a pension from the carrier, and some savings I've been careful with over the years. I am not a wealthy man, but I have enough. I've always had enough, and I've never been careless with it. That, it turned out, was the relevant detail. His name was Kevin Marsh, and my son had met him the way people meet people these days, through a neighborhood app. Kevin had posted about offering free home energy audits, said he was a contractor helping homeowners qualify for federal efficiency rebates. Marcus mentioned him once in passing in August. Said a guy in the neighborhood was helping people knock money off their utility bills, seemed to know what he was talking about. I remember thinking, that's a good service. Wish more people did that. In September, Marcus mentioned him again. Kevin had done an audit on their house, found a few things, written up a report, said the rebate program was real, that there was some paperwork involved, but he'd handled all of it for 2 other families on the street without any issues. Marcus said April liked him, said he was the kind of guy who showed up when he said he would, which apparently is rare enough now to be noteworthy. By October, Kevin Marsh had been inside my son's home 5 times. He'd had coffee at their kitchen table. He'd bounced a ball in the backyard with Cooper. He had looked at Marcus and April's utility records, their square footage, and the age of their HVAC system, and he had begun mentioning me. Not directly. I want to be clear about that because it's the part people miss when they hear this kind of story. The approach is never direct. It's sympathetic. It's neighborly. It comes wrapped in something that sounds like concern. Kevin had said things like, older homes lose so much heat, especially if they haven't been updated in a while. He'd said, retirees on fixed income are the ones who really get hurt by rising energy costs. He'd said, your dad owns his place outright, right? He could probably qualify for more than most people. Marcus, because he loves me and had no reason to be suspicious of a helpful neighbor, had said, yeah, he's pretty sharp actually. Spent almost 3 decades in insurance. Kevin Marsh's response, according to my son, was to nod slowly and say, good. Those guys know how to read a contract. I'd love to walk him through this sometime if he's interested. No pressure. Just a conversation. When Marcus told me all of this later, not during that Friday phone call, but after everything had come apart, I recognized it immediately for what it was. He had been building toward me for 2 months. He had established trust through my son before he ever said my name. He had framed any future contact as informal, casual, just a neighbor helping out. The setup was already complete before I even knew he existed. I want to explain something about this kind of operation because I spent nearly 3 decades studying how fraud moves through families and communities, and I still came within a few weeks of being taken. The most effective approach is never the one that comes from a stranger. It comes from someone already inside your circle of trust. Kevin Marsh didn't need to earn my confidence. He borrowed Marcus's. By the time he introduced himself to me, he'd already spent months becoming part of my son's ordinary life. The first time I met him was at Marcus's house on a Saturday morning in late October. I'd come over to help with a gutter that had pulled away from the fascia board. Normal weekend visit, nothing out of the ordinary. Kevin stopped by while we were up on the ladder, said he was dropping off some paperwork for April. Marcus invited him to stay for coffee. It seemed spontaneous. I understand now that it wasn't. He was exactly what the profile looked like, early 50s, work boots, the kind of easy confidence that comes from years of knocking on doors and having people open them. He didn't oversell himself. That was the thing I noticed and filed away without fully understanding why it mattered. People who are running a pitch lean forward. They're eager. They fill silences. Kevin Marsh let silences sit. He asked one question about the insurance industry, listened to my answer like he was actually interested, made one observation about how fraud patterns had shifted since everything moved online, smart enough to sound credible. Then he asked about my gutters and we talked about fascia boards for 10 minutes. I drove home thinking he seemed like a solid guy. He waited 3 weeks before reaching out directly. A text to my cell, which meant Marcus had passed along my number, which my son confirmed later without any hesitation because Kevin had said he wanted to send me information about a rebate program specifically for homes built before 1985. My house was built in 1978. He'd done his homework. We exchanged a few texts. He sent me a link to an actual federal program, real, legitimate, not something he'd invented. He asked a couple of follow-up questions about my heating system. Then he mentioned, almost as an aside, that he'd been helping some homeowners in the area with something he called energy equity structuring, a way of consolidating rebates and efficiency credits into a single benefit package that could offset utility costs for several years. Not an investment. He was careful about that word, just a way of making sure existing programs work together instead of separately. He said if I was ever curious, he was happy to walk me through it. No obligation. Just neighbor to neighbor. I said, maybe sometime. He said no rush at all. Then he went quiet for 2 weeks. My phone rang on a Wednesday morning and it was Marcus. He'd called on a Wednesday, not Sunday. He asked about my knee, talked about Cooper's soccer game, mentioned April was thinking about repainting the kitchen. And then knew the end of the call just before he said goodbye. He said, "Hey Dad, you remember that thing we used to do when I was in high school? The check-in signal?" I went still. When Marcus was 15, he started driving. New driver, new situations, new places I couldn't always anticipate. We made an agreement, the two of us, that if he ever needed me to come get him, no explanation required. No questions asked that night. He could call me and say he'd left his phone charger somewhere and ask if I'd seen it. That was it. That was the whole thing. It was our version of a safety net. He used it twice in 2 years, once at a party in 10th grade and once in a parking lot his junior year when a situation felt wrong. I never asked for details until he was ready to give them, which he eventually did years later. No one else knew about it. Not his mother, not his friends, just the two of us. What about it? I said. My voice stayed even. I made sure of that. I was just thinking about it the other day. Anyway, I'll let you go, Dad. Talk Sunday. He hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. Then I put on my jacket, got in the truck, and drove to his house. He didn't look frightened when he answered the door. He looked like a man who had been carrying something alone for a while and was tired of the weight. He took one look at my face and some of what he'd been holding together started to give. We sat at his kitchen table. April brought coffee she kept refilling without being asked, and Marcus told me. 3 weeks before that Wednesday call, Kevin Marsh had come to the house on a Tuesday afternoon when April was at work and Marcus was working from home. He'd brought a revised version of the efficiency assessment, not the helpful overview from before, but a formal proposal, a document that suggested enrolling in something called the Consolidated Home Equity and Efficiency Trust, a program he described as a public-private partnership that pooled rebate funds for maximum impact. He'd walked Marcus through it carefully. The terminology was real. The general concept wasn't invented from nothing. It sounded, Marcus told me, like something that should exist. Then Kevin mentioned me. He said he'd picked up from their conversations that I might be skeptical of financial products, which was understandable given my background. He said he wasn't worried about me as a potential client. He was worried about me as a neighbor. He said that people with careers in risk assessment sometimes developed a kind of professional overcaution that actually left them more exposed to certain types of programs, not less, because they were looking for the wrong signals. He said he'd love to have a conversation with me directly, but thought it might land better coming from Marcus first. He was asking my son to help him get to me. And Marcus said yes. He said yes because he trusted Kevin. Because Kevin had spent months in his house, at his table, kicking a ball around with his kid. He said yes because he thought he was helping his father. He told me this at the kitchen table and his jaw was tight the whole time. About a week after that conversation, Marcus mentioned to Kevin that I owned my home outright, that I had a pension, and that I'd been thinking about what to do with some savings I'd been letting sit in a low-yield account. He told me this and looked out the window. I passed that right along, he said. Didn't even think twice. I reached across the table and put my hand on his arm. You didn't do anything wrong, I told him. I meant it completely. He had been worked the same way a seasoned contractor works old wood, slowly, with patience, until it does what you need it to do. The fault was not in my son's character, it was in the method Kevin Marsh had spent months perfecting. But I needed Marcus to listen carefully right now. I'd spent 28 years watching this pattern operate. I knew 2 things with certainty. First, that Kevin Marsh was almost certainly a name he used in this state, maybe not in others. A man this methodical doesn't build a template like this once. He refines it. He runs it until it stops working and then he moves. Second, the moment I showed any hesitation or started asking hard questions, he would either accelerate and pressure me before I had time to act, or he would disappear. In either case, the window was narrow. I asked Marcus 3 questions. Had he or April moved any money or signed anything based on Kevin's guidance? He said no. They'd been planning to, had a meeting set for the following week, but hadn't yet. Did he know whether Kevin had had similar conversations with other neighbors? He mentioned one name, an older man, 2 houses down, a retired teacher named Phil who lived alone and had mentioned Kevin helped him get set up with something last month. Was there any paperwork? Any documents Kevin had left behind? April went to get the folder from their home office. I photographed every page on my phone. Then I called a woman named Carol Witten, a fraud examiner I'd worked alongside on several multi-county cases before I retired. We hadn't spoken in almost a year. She answered on the 3rd ring. I told her what I had. She was quiet long enough that I thought the call had dropped. How clean is your documentation, she said. Clean enough to open with, I said. Don't go dark on him, she said. Don't spook him. If he reaches out about the formal meeting, take it. Keep the channel warm and call me the minute he confirms. That evening, I texted Kevin. Hey Kevin, I've been giving that program some more thought. I think I'm ready to hear the full picture if the offer still stands. He responded in 8 minutes. Ray, that's great to hear. I can come to you if that's easier. Saturday morning work? I said Saturday worked fine. I spent the next 2 days pulling everything I still had access to: business licensing databases, property records, contractor registrations. Kevin Marsh had a contractor's license issued 14 months ago, a business registration for something called Marsh Home Solutions LLC, filed in a county I'd never heard of him mention, and before 4 years ago, nothing, no history, no footprint, which meant either a clean identity or one that had been rebuilt specifically for this kind of work. Carol called Friday afternoon. He was in their system under a different name, had run something nearly identical in 2 other states, Michigan and Tennessee. Different neighborhoods, same structure, extended relationship building period, family endorsements, soft approach targeting retirees, a fund that collected money but didn't distribute it to anything real. They needed a recorded solicitation, a formal pitch with paperwork. One more piece. Saturday morning was overcast and cold. Kevin pulled up at 9 in a gray pickup truck. He had a canvas portfolio under one arm and a cup of coffee in the other hand, and he smiled when I opened the door the way you smile at someone you've already decided to trust you. We sat at my kitchen table. He was good. I want to say that plainly. He was good, I want to say that plainly. He was very good at what he did. He laid everything out slowly, let me ask questions, answered each one with patience and precision. He never pushed. He framed the entire thing around protection, not growth. That's the hook for men my age. Not get more. Don't lose what you have. He talked about utility costs, inflation. What happens to fixed incomes when energy prices spike? He used real terminology correctly and in context. He had a single-page summary that looked like something a real program would produce. Then he said, "What I'd recommend for someone in your position, Ray, is moving a portion, not everything, just a portion, into the trust vehicle by the end of the month. The enrollment window closes then, and I know how that sounds, but it's just how the funding cycle works." There it was, the artificial deadline. One of the oldest moves in the book and still effective because it sounds like information rather than pressure. I nodded slowly and said, "That makes sense. What would I need to sign to get started?" He opened the portfolio. Carol's team was parked around the corner. She had told me the moment he presents documents for signature, that's the opening. Don't sign, just receive. I took the papers he slid across my kitchen table. I looked at them for a long moment. "Can I hold on to these overnight?" I said. "Old habit from the insurance days," he smiled. "Of course, no rush at all." He left at 10:40. I photographed every page and sent it to Carol before his truck reached the end of my street. By Monday morning, Carol's unit had confirmed that the trust account listed in the documents was a shell registered to a holding company that existed only on paper. The enrollment deadline was fabricated. The LLC, when fully traced, connected to 2 other names across 3 states. There were 6 known victims. The total losses were over $230,000. Phil, my son's neighbor down the street, had transferred $48,000 the previous month. He recovered most of it, not all. They picked Kevin up on Thursday. I called Marcus that afternoon. I won't tell you everything he said because some of it belongs to him. But I'll tell you that his voice broke once and mine came close, and that after a minute of quiet he said, "I practically handed him a map, Dad. Name, address, what you owned, what you had saved." I drew him a map. I told him what I know to be true from almost 3 decades of watching this work. The moment a man like Kevin Marsh moves into a neighborhood, he starts looking for a door. He will find one. He will find someone who cares enough about the people in their life to talk about them. Someone whose loyalty becomes the entry point. What Marcus had done was love his father and trust a person who had spent months engineering that trust on purpose. That is not a failure of judgment. It is a failure that was manufactured specifically to look like generosity. We found out later he'd run the same operation in suburban Detroit and outside Nashville. The method was the same every time. Find a connector, someone embedded in the neighborhood with existing credibility. Build deep trust through them over several months. Use that trust as an introduction to the actual target. In one case in Tennessee, an elderly widow had transferred over $90,000 before her daughter noticed something was wrong. I think about the Friday call I almost didn't answer. I think about what would have happened if Marcus had kept managing whatever he was feeling by himself for another 2 or 3 weeks. I think about that Saturday afternoon at his kitchen table when I shook Kevin Marsh's hand and walked away thinking, "Decent guy. What I want you to hear is not that I was smart enough to see it. I almost wasn't. I came this close to texting Kevin back on a Friday night, telling him I wasn't interested, and walking away from the whole thing without understanding what I'd walked away from. By then, he might have been sitting at my kitchen table with documents I didn't know to call Carol about. What stopped that from happening was a signal. A 15-year-old boy and his father invented in a driveway 23 years ago in case he ever needed a way out of somewhere he didn't feel safe. He never needed it at a party. He never needed it at a party. He never needed it in a parking lot after the night things got strange. He needed it on a Wednesday morning sitting in his home office carrying something he didn't know how to say out loud about a man who had become part of his family's ordinary week. After it was over, on a Sunday, I drove to Marcus's house for dinner. April made a pot of chili. Cooper wanted to show me something on a tablet. Paige fell asleep on the couch before 8. At some point during the meal, while the kids were arguing about something neither of them would be able to describe by morning, Marcus looked across at me. He didn't say anything. He reached across the corner of the table and put his hand over mine. Tapped twice, waited, tapped once more. I looked at him. He just nodded. Small, quiet, like it meant something only we needed to understand. 23 years that signal had been waiting, and it had finally done exactly what we built it for. If you have someone in your life, a parent, a child, a brother, a sister, and there is nothing between you, no quiet way to say "I need you" without having to explain it, make one. Keep it simple. Keep it private. Because the people who want to take from you are betting that you'll be too embarrassed, too uncertain, or too afraid of being wrong to ask for help directly. A signal gets around all of that. It says everything in a language only 2 people speak. It saved my family. I am certain of that. I keep coming back to the moment I almost didn't answer that Friday call, not because I was busy with something important. I was replacing a fence post. I had dirt on my hands and a sore back, and I looked at my son's name on the screen and thought, "He's fine, I'll call him tonight." That's how close it came. A fence post and a sore back and a habit of telling myself things are fine when I don't want to be interrupted. What I've learned from 28 years of watching fraud move through families is that the damage almost never comes from a single bad decision. It comes from a chain of small, reasonable-seeming ones. Marcus trusted Kevin because Kevin had earned that trust carefully, over months, the way you'd build anything meant to hold weight. Kevin chose Marcus because Marcus is a good man who loves his father and talks about the people he loves. I almost missed the signal because I was tired, and I assumed. Every link in that chain made a kind of sense on its own. That's what makes it hard to stop. Kevin Marsh didn't win because he was smarter than us. He won, temporarily, because he understood something about how trust works inside a family. He understood that if he could become ordinary to Marcus, part of the regular furniture of his week, then Marcus would stop examining him. And he was right. That's not a flaw in my son. That's just how human beings function. We stop looking hard at the things that have stopped surprising us. What stopped Kevin was not my experience, not my databases, not the 28 years. It was Marcus's integrity. When something finally felt wrong enough that he couldn't keep carrying it alone, he found a way to say so. He didn't have the words. He used the one signal he had. That took something real. It took the kind of honesty that's harder than it sounds, the willingness to admit that you might have made a mistake and that you need someone, and to reach past your own embarrassment and do it anyway. I think about that when I think about what I want Cooper and Paige to carry into the world. Not just that they'll be careful. Careful isn't enough on its own. I want them to be clear-eyed about people. The kind of clear-eyed that comes from paying attention over time, from asking questions, from not letting comfort replace judgment. I want them to be honest with themselves when something doesn't sit right, even when it's inconvenient, even when the person they need to doubt has been kind to them. And I want them to be the kind of people who ask for help before the problem gets large enough that asking becomes harder. Marcus did all three of those things on a Wednesday morning with 2 taps and 1 more at the end of a phone call. He had the character to know something was wrong. He had the sense to say so without saying it out loud. And he had the strength to reach across 23 years of silence and use the one language that only the two of us speak. Phil, 2 doors down, lost $48,000. He got most of it back, not all. I think about that every time I drive past his house. I think about what a few weeks' difference would have meant for my family. Make the signal before you need it. That's all I'm saying. Make it while everything is fine, while there's no pressure, while it feels almost unnecessary, because the moment you actually need it, you won't have time to invent one.